Okay. Good morning. My name is Mike. Welcome to Allen Avenue Unitarian Universalist Church's worship this morning. We're a freely gathered, open, welcoming community supported by our contributions, which can be made with the donate button on our website or by going to our Breeze program, or if you're a member, by mailing a check to 524 Allen Avenue, Portland, Maine, or of course, the donation basket. Our Share the Plate recipient for the month is MUSAN, the Maine Unitarian Universalist State Action Network. To learn more about that, you can go to our website where it is linked. I also have one announcement. Polly Juneau and Ann Packard would like to thank everyone who participated in yesterday's community yard sale. It was great to see everyone and connect again in this wonderful community. They'd like to announce that although not yet audited by the Finance Committee, we made close to $3,000. Congratulations, everyone. This morning's service is entitled Finding Ourselves. It's presented by Allen Avenue's Worship Committee. Lay-led worship is a tradition at this and many other Unitarian Universalist societies. At Allen Avenue, the Worship Committee either sponsors or presents one such service a month. On most other Sundays, worship is led by our minister, the Reverend Donna Dahlham. A chime will now be rung to start the service, and Keith will light.
We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves. Also to be welcoming to whoever we meet and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together.
Good morning, I'm Rick Kimball, and I share these opening words. Finding ourselves here at A2U2 by Zoom, we dare to hope that, yes, we will indeed find ourselves this morning, find ourselves at least in part, find ourselves through new understanding of other and all, find ourselves through deepened connection with friends and strangers and inmost self, find ourselves through sound and silence, through spoken word and music, through active search and passive reception, find ourselves by learning and pondering what members of our worship committee have found through their own UU-based exploration of life.
Good morning. I'm Anna Noyes-Benoit, and I'm happy to share this time for all ages entitled Shipwrecked. What do you think might happen if our youth group planned an outing and things went very wrong and they found 6 of them shipwrecked on an abandoned, deserted island. There is, of course, a classic book written in the 1950s, which is still required reading for some high school students about this. This book of fiction painted a very dark and bleak picture of what would happen. But fortunately, there's a real life example to contrast William Golding's Lord of the Flies. In 1965, when I was just a teenager, a group of boys from a Tongan boarding school decided that they were sick of the school's food and borrowed a fishing boat to go on an adventure. At first, things went rather disastrously as a storm came up that destroyed most of their boat. So instead of heading to Tahiti, the 6 boys were drifting and had lost their way. Tonga is a country that is made up of about 150 islands, and it's located in the South Pacific Ocean. However, most of Tonga is made up of 3 main island groups. The islands are made from coral, reefs, and volcanoes, but surprisingly, the land is fertile and good for growing crops. Forests cover over 10% of the land. If you look on a map, you will find Tonga north of New Zealand and east of Australia. Tongans are taught to share from the beginning. To quote from a book, a boy said, "You're taught to treat everyone like family. You're taught to survive together. It's not every man to himself. It's hard to exist without community. So even when one person is ill or hurt, it's automatic to help." This sounds a little like the values of our church community. So, what happened to this group of 6 shipwrecked boys, you may be wondering? After being at sea for a number of days, they were very excited and encouraged to see land. They abandoned what was left of their boat and swam to the island, but soon discovered that it had a very shallow beach and craggy, sharp, rocky cliffs. They knew they needed to climb up to the top of the island to find the flat, good land, but it took over 100 days, over 3 months of trying before they made it up over those cliffs. In the meanwhile, they lived on things like birds and raw fish and slept on a very uncomfortable outcrop of rock. But once they made it to the top of the cliff, they were delighted to find the remains of what had been an attempt to inhabit the island. They found banana trees and pineapple and coconut trees. One of the boys remembered learning how to start a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together. And after a lot of work, they lit a fire. And once that fire was lit, they never once let it go out. Once that fire was lit, they never once let it go out. They divided themselves into 3 teams of 2 boys each. 2 to tend the fire and cook, 2 boys to garden and tend crops, and 2 boys who would stand lookout in case any ships passed near. At night, they gathered together and they prayed and they expressed gratitude to be alive, to have found a way to feed and care for themselves. They also sang all the songs they knew and invented new ones. One of the boys even created a musical instrument from coconut shells. Furthermore, they invented a system to deal with conflict. If an argument broke out, the boys would separate and go to different parts of the island and wait until they felt better. They reported that after about 4 hours, tempers cooled and they would rejoin. They would each talk about it and offer an apology for what went wrong. A full year and more passed with these 6 boys living alone on this deserted island when a boat finally did pass by. The captain saw the boys signaling wildly, and when he approached the island, they all swam out and requested to be rescued and returned to their homes. Once they were back in the capital of Tonga, they were arrested for stealing the boat, but the fellow who rescued them, the boat captain, made a deal with the court. This captain paid the boat's fine if they agreed to return to the island, which is called Ata, and film a documentary. This is still out on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it. A doctor examined the boys and found them to be in excellent health and strong, well developed. A boy who had fallen off the cliff and broken his leg had been treated by the other boys who had wrapped it in banana leaves, and amazingly, the leg had healed very well. The boys had created a badminton court and a rudimentary gym with weights. They had farmed the land, corralled and raised chickens, and they agreed they wouldn't mind going back to ABBA to live, but they'd want their family and their friends to be with them. Furthermore, all 6 boys remained lifelong friends and created a successful fishing business together. The values they practiced at home and school of cooperation and community were how they not only survived, but grew together in friendship and thrived. I think those same values can be found written on the words around the inside of this building and in our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. It is good to be here. It is good to be here together.
My name is Erica Bartlett, and when I first joined the worship committee back in 2006, I didn't know what to expect. I only knew that I was hooked on doing worship services from my prior experience with senior youth group services, women's services, winter solstice services, and young adult services. And since the young adult services had recently come to an end, I wanted to find another way to participate. That made joining the worship committee perfect timing. As I reflect back on what I've learned over the past 15 years, a few things come to mind. The first is how many differences exist within the church. I know we talk about not having much diversity, and certainly we could use more, but we're by no means all the same. As a personal example, I didn't fully realize just how detail-oriented I was until I started working in groups, including the worship committee, and realized not everyone is that way. We also have different ways of doing things, different levels and types of spirituality, and different degrees of comfort with technology, to name a few. But the beauty of working with others who aren't the same as me is gaining new perspectives and being reminded that not everything has to be done exactly, or even at all, the way I envision it. Despite these differences, I've also learned how much unites us. More than once after a service, people have come up to me and said that the topic felt exactly right for them that day, and what I said was just what they needed. That's always gratifying, especially since I never quite know how much of what I'm going to say will resonate with others. With some topics, this is easier, like when we've talked about loneliness, friendship, love, depression, courage, acceptance, and healing. Those are things we can all relate to in one way or another. It's a little more challenging when we talk about things like refrigerator doors, junk, or spring cleaning. But for me, that's part of the fun of it, to come at even unusual and not traditionally spiritual topics and see if I can find a way to connect with them and make them relevant for others. That brings me to something else I first learned long ago and have reconfirmed every Sunday when I present. This is a very accepting congregation, one that appreciates and celebrates deep, honest sharing. I've occasionally had people thank me for talking about difficult subjects, like my mom's death. And I can only be that open and vulnerable because I know that those here in the church will receive it with care. All of this has made being on the worship committee my favorite thing to do at church, which is why I'm still here after all this time. It even got me thinking about the possibility of becoming a minister. But I quickly found that while I like doing services, doing them about once a month, not one a week, is more my speed. And I also wasn't interested in the other aspects of ministry. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to do the part I like best and to do it as part of a team. And although moving to virtual services during the pandemic was hard, it certainly gave us opportunities to learn even more things. Not only technical things, although I've gotten reasonably good at doing video editing for services, but also learning to be patient with each other as everyone figured out Zoom and the challenges of muting and unmuting and sometimes speaking over each other. We had to learn how to be present together in a two-dimensional world. And while it didn't always work or work for everyone, it was far better than nothing. So it's an adjustment again to return to in-person, to seeing if anyone laughs at certain points, or if someone's cell phone will go off, or if the microphones will work. but I'm happy to adapt again, which is good, because after the past couple of years, I won't even pretend to know what this year will be like. The one thing I can safely say is that I look forward to continuing to learn and navigate it with you in these services and in the rest of church.
My name is Mike Luce, not Mick, as I may appear on the program. I'm a member of the worship committee. By the time I first walked through that door for a summer service at Allen Avenue, I'd gone through a lot of others, or at least peeked inside. I'd read lots of religious tracts. Some of them intrigued me. Some of them befuddled me. Some repulsed me. None of them stuck. And that wasn't for lack of trying by a few well-intentioned folks, but their certainty in their various truths always left me feeling a little uneasy. You see, I wasn't sure of much of anything when it came to the subject of life, the universe, and everything, as Douglas Adams put it. Every religion, no matter how much it was in sync with my basic ethos, ultimately had something, a credo, an orthodoxy, which just got my Scooby sense going. You know, the really reaction. I'm still not sure of all that much on the big spiritual questions. I have some general, truly ineffable feelings, for sure, but I'm pretty short on the details. So after attending a few lay-led services and getting a sense of the place, I found myself asking, quite literally, where do I sign up? We had an interim minister at the time, Steve, and I think some of the normal procedures got lost during that transition time. The way I joined, no classes, no ceremony. We walked into the office and I signed the book. Very simple. I got involved in the choir and playing the flute occasionally. The first few years, I just showed up and took things in. Later on was pastoral care, which seemed a natural with my background in community mental health. Eventually, I joined the worship committee. I got to tell you, it took me a while to get up the nerve to actually rope my thoughts in on the topic of the month and put them into something resembling a coherent piece. Most of my experience in writing was clinical boilerplate, so I wasn't sure this was going to work out. I still questioned myself, but the paths we go down seem to take me somewhere worth the effort after all. The worship community has been an important part of my experience here. It makes me think and feel and hear the thoughts and feelings of others. The act of writing out my thoughts with an eye to sharing them with the congregational is still humbling. A lot of chin stoking, not much production sometimes. Then I reread it, and it's even more humbling. Sometimes first impressions or reactions don't last. Maybe those are the times I value the most, when I challenge my own orthodoxy. There's a sort of ironic saying, wherever you go, there you are. I'm finding myself here, little by little, and this committee is one of the ways. We're always looking for new members to come join and enrich us and all of us. Talk to any of us. Maybe it's for you too.
about my search for my spiritual self. Well, I can't say I've arrived at a specific destination on my spiritual path, since aspiring to keep my heart and mind open is at the core of my spirituality. But I've definitely found a spiritual neighborhood where I feel both challenged and fulfilled. And A2U2 is my home base in that neighborhood. I got to A2U2 on a journey that started with parents who were UUs in spirit, though they were not churchgoers, and in the case of my father, rebelled strongly against any form of organized religion. But they had been close to a Unitarian minister in the early years of their marriage. And apparently he had a strong effect on them, or they were just in sync with those values anyway. Because when I started attending A2U2, the 7 principles resonated deeply with me as the type of values I'd grown up with. I became intrigued with Buddhism as a teenager when Dad and I would watch Alan Watts' TV shows explaining Buddhism. There was no way to get formally involved with it in Maine back then. And I didn't do anything about that interest until I began my recovery from alcoholism in the 80s. The recovery program I was in was similar to Buddhism in so many ways, despite the mainstream Christian language often used in the program. Practicing kindness, non-clinging, staying in the moment, and accepting unknown outcomes were core principles of the program, as was an emphasis on the spiritual search, the individual spiritual search. And these remain at the core of my spirituality. In 1997, I did join a Buddhist group and eventually took formal vows to become a Buddhist. I still consider myself one, well, more like a UU Buddhist. And I belong to the Don Redwood meditation group here at church. Participating in the group has helped me revive and continue the meditation practice that has allowed light into my consciousness when I practice it for so many years. And our discussions help me see how I want to live and what my spiritual goals are. I was first drawn to A2U2 by the inspiration I found in the sermons. From the first, I realized that the 7 principles are guideposts that I believe in completely. I was first drawn to the people of the church when Sally Breen stopped to talk to me after the first service that I went to, and several more after that. For a very introverted person, me, that was especially meaningful. In A2U2, I've found people with values I share and an openness and willingness to love others that I aspire to. Through every activity I've been involved with here, I've grown spiritually and emotionally. And I'll also mention the worship committee. I've loved being on the committee from the beginning, and I've also found it challenging. I had to learn new technology. I had to face myself literally as I recorded videos of myself reading the reflections I wrote. If anything can teach acceptance, that can. One of the most fulfilling duties for me is writing those reflections. That has brought revelations and self-understanding that have been important in my spiritual growth. And working as a team with others towards a common goal, which I see as a spiritual goal, is a source of great satisfaction. So if you're casting around for something fun and spiritually fulfilling to do, I heartily recommend joining us on the worship committee. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Keith Prairie. My pronouns are he and him, and this is a long path to A2U2. I am lucky when it comes to finding a path to Unitarian Universalist faith. My parents were from small towns across from Albany, New York, and both attended a Methodist church in Castleton-on-Hudson. They married and moved to Seattle, and then on to various other places where my dad was a doctor for the Public Health Service. Among the 12 towns and cities we lived in before I went to college, 6 of them had UU connections. My parents did some church shopping along the way, drawn to the liberal end of the spectrum. It was probably in Phoenix at the UU congregation of Paradise Valley that I started to have an understanding of what Unitarian Universalism meant. I think primarily it was there because of an RE director who had lessons that drew me in, and also connections to the minister's children, the 3 of them. I remember going on camping and rafting trips with the church. It was a lovely time. We were in Phoenix for 3 years and then in Billings, Montana, until I graduated from high school. There we attended the Billings UU Fellowship, which was a small group and lay-led. Both my parents were involved at various times in volunteering and on the board positions of authority. I was disappointed that there were not very many kids my age at that fellowship. While in Billings, I was involved in starting an ecology club, and the UU Fellowship was involved with the first ever Earth Day celebrations. I also attended a month-long outdoor wilderness survival course at National Outdoor Leadership School in the Wind River area of Wyoming. My family had a long history of camping and sailing, and it launched me on the road to becoming an ecologist and having an affinity for nature. When I was in high school, I got involved in LRY, Liberal Religious Youth. And this is the UU organization for teens and young adults that was in existence at the time. I went to 4 or 5 youth conferences in Colorado, Iowa, and Illinois. The rumors you may have heard about LRY are true. It was the 70s, of course. But being a naive kid from Podunk, Billings, Montana, my eyes were opened at least a little bit. But I left that experience still feeling like a fairly naive kid. When I graduated from high school, my dad returned to school at Yale to do a psychiatric residency. I went with my family to Guilford, Connecticut, and elected to work for a year before continuing my education. During that time, my parents occasionally attended one of the UU churches in that area, and I ended up going fairly regularly to the Hampton, Connecticut church and becoming a youth advisor and going on several retreats and camping, and we even put a service on, wouldn't you know it? When I did settle on a college, it was up here in Maine at College of the Atlantic. It was a good place for me to continue my education. It was about ecology, so it was just the ticket for me. After graduating from College of the Atlantic, I moved to Portland for work. And over the next few years, I tried out several professions: projectionist, carpentry, group home counselor, job coach, now musician. I'd started to attend A2U2 soon after arriving and have had interesting and fruitful conversations and friendships with several of the clergy and many. 40 years on, A2U2 is still a good fit for me. So here I am, content in the hats I wear at A2U2. I serve on the worship committee, I help with tech stuff, and I frequently share my music. I have been a computer technician for about 15 years, and I'm about to retire from that. We will see where things go from here.
When I was a kid, I loved alphabet soup. Today, as an older adult, I find myself craving a bowl of warm question mark soup. A bubbly broth with little curlicue thingies demanding answers to such existential A2U2 questions as, is we what we is? Or is we what we isn't? And Isn't we what we is? Or isn't we what we isn't? Now, in a land of an unchurched majority, we call ourselves a church. But are we? A church, say many websites, is a place for Christian worship. Now, my father-in-law became alarmed some decades ago when he learned that Tyrrell and I were involved in a church. He himself had escaped the boyhood embrace of a high Anglican church, and he was nervous about our family and our fate. But when he visited us and attended a service here, he came away relieved. This isn't a church, he said. I don't know what it is, but I think it's okay. Well, is we what we is, or is we what we isn't? Let's jump ahead a couple of decades and listen to my son David after he attended services at A2U2 congregations in California. We think of ourselves as liberals who are broken from the past, he said. But our Sunday mornings echo that past with their hymns and their prayers and their sermons. I don't get it, he said. Is we what we is, or is we what we isn't? Every Sunday we worship. We even have a worship committee, which I hope more of you will join. But worship, says Merriam-Webster's first definition, is reverence offered a divine being or supernatural power. Well, we did once have an angel on this back wall. Did you know that? We took it down. Is we what we is, or is we what we isn't? We speak and sometimes sing of God, though few of us, if any, accept the idea of a traditional God seated on a heavenly throne. One of my UU heroes, the Reverend Forrest Church, argued the case for God by demanding that doubters describe the God they did not believe in. Then he would offer them something else. But we at Allen Avenue went through several years of worrying about any use at all of the G word. We sort of nervously pretty much banned it. Today, we practice prayer, which the Oxford English Dictionary says is a solemn request for help or expression of thanks addressed to God or an object of worship. Is we what we is, or is we what we isn't? Our recent interim minister, Reverend Anita Farber Robertson, spoke often of our Sunday school, using what I consider to be a somewhat dated term. Most of us speak of RE, by which we mean religious education. But what we really offer our kids when we're at our best is religious exploration, with an occasional break for religious entertainment. Is we what we is, or is we what we isn't? Well, there's a good question. And I have a good answer. Is we what we is, or is we what we isn't? Yes, we is. We is a bunch of searching questioners, and I love us for that fact. When we finally conquer COVID, let's celebrate with a communal meal of question mark soup and commit ourselves to a continuing search for finding out who us is and how us might find ways to appeal to the large unchurched community around us.
We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our heart with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we're together again.